Before we go further too, we've got to thank OFS and Imagine a Place, because this is an incredible place that we're in.
Absolutely.
And that's a story all by itself. The theme, I think, is going to be interesting because we've kind of broadcasted that it's going to be about emotional intelligence. I'm sure people have a lot of different versions of what that means. But it also ties into other elements of trust. In schools, they have something called social and emotional literacy. And then I've been playing with what's happening to empathy in society, in the workplace, and are we at risk in that? So with that in mind, we're going to frame it in the current context. And so I thought it would be really good just to have a little bit of conversation about what is emotional intelligence. And Karen, I know you do assessments in emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with you, and then we'll just play off of what you experience and what you do.
Yeah, so I think simply speaking, emotional intelligence is a set of skills that relate to the social emotional skills that somebody has in terms of building relationships, making decisions, stress management, and it even relates to problem solving and things like that. We think of emotional intelligence as just empathy, but empathy is one in probably 15 different subscales or attributes of emotional intelligence.
Okay. Good. So there's a chance for me to have emotional intelligence?
Yes. Right.
Yeah. And Val, how about for you? How you would define emotional intelligence in the context that you work in?
Mm-hmm. I think, Karen, what you shared is a really good definition. And I think to build on that, emotional intelligence starts with understanding how I, as a leader, affect other people.
I like that.
One of the things that I've been thinking about and I've become really passionate about, especially in the last few years, is that our greatest opportunities are not really about space. They're about leadership. We can create the greatest environments in the world, and if leadership is poor, people don't want to be in them. And so understanding how I, as a leader, affect my team, in my mind and experience, is where emotional intelligence begins.
Well, that's good. I like that. Justin?
Yeah, that's great. So I think for me, emotional intelligence really came to mind. I mean, I didn't even know if it was a term that I knew of back when I was this, but working as an urban designer, a community designer, working with neighborhoods, towns, and cities, typically underserved neighborhoods, people that hadn't had a chance to work with architects, planners, landscape architects, and that it's really this idea of like understanding where they're coming from, making sure that you're being, creating that trust, being authentic, and so that really comes up as that empathy, right? Trying to empathize. A lot of times you can't because you aren't in those same situations, but trying to make sure that you're understanding perhaps where they're coming from and why, their motivations, as well as your own.
Yeah. And it comes to mind as you're talking about this. I was in a presentation talking about leading through change. How do we lead through change? One of the questions that came to me was an insurance company that had just moved people into new environments. They had figured out, brought in consultants, done all the things they thought were in the best interest of their people. And I'm probably convinced that it's a beautiful place, but it was rejected.
Mm-hmm.
People resisted it, didn't want to come in. And it talks to me a little bit about the process of emotional intelligence and, understanding who we're doing it for.
Or with.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good distinction there. Yeah. And understanding how we impact the process. And I think, my background, we've all come in as problem solvers, experts in our fields. And does that sometimes get in our way when we're working with groups of people, especially coming out of what we've come out of recently? So I'll just throw that open.
Well, I think sometimes you can forget what you didn't know when you've been doing this for a long time. When I was teaching, I taught senior level students in a core studio course that was a capstone course for them. And it was on branded environments, which is one of my specialties. I have a very strong sense of what's on brand and what's not. And that was the core class that I taught. And one summer I was asked to teach a freshman class.
Oh,
And it was not a good experience for me or them. And I knew that. I mean, I really tried to rescue it through, and it turned out fine. But I was really grateful that I had students that were very honest with me about what they weren't getting and what they needed. And the crux of the issue in that situation was I had forgotten what I didn't know when I was in their shoes.
Yeah.
So I do think when you've been doing this kind of work for a long, long time, we know that we get to the other side of a project and it's going to be great. They don't know that. And I think in a situation like the example you mentioned, Rex, space is an investment in people, but it's going to fall flat if you're not already investing in your people in other ways. To them, it's going to feel like, oh, you think this is going to fix it? This is going to fix
like
all the
that.
things
Right.
that we're not getting that we need. And so the context is the entire employee experience. And if our investment is in space is a part of that, then, and we're walking people through that change well, it has less likelihood of falling flat.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think this is brilliant. I would add that, the purpose, right? Why are we coming together? Why are we bringing people together? And not that we created a space and now you have to come here X number of days. So building the trust and the conversations around why it matters for us to be together. And that is culture. So the space will enable us to do this, but it's not going to create culture by itself. So again, it's how are we treating each other and getting curious on what is holding people from wanting to go back. Some of it is just, I don't want to commute, right, to get back to work. But some of it might be experiences that people had in the past that they don't want to have when they come back to work. So it's taking a hard look at the systems that we had previous to COVID and where we are right now, things that we may have to let go and new systems we have to create and put in place. But also just being open to creating different norms of being together and making them explicit. So it's not, there isn't that level of uncertainty, what it means when I'm in this space, what am I supposed to do, how often am I supposed to be here, how is it going to impact me if I can't be here as often, and those kinds of things. Just really helping the organization create more explicit norms around what it means to return to the workspace.
Those are all the unspoken codes.
Yep.
Where you're either in or out by doing that. In talking about moving forward in construction projects, we sometimes talk about start, stop, continue. And it sounds like we need to kind of go through what we used to do, what we want to keep, what we want to stop. Justin, for you, the process.
Right. So I think the process, is as important, really, more so almost than the product. A lot of times, as we're working with clients, those that, don't have design backgrounds or that background, we have to bring them along with us, right? And from the start, we can't just at the end be like, oh, by the way, here's your, new space. And a lot of that is, I think, as designers, we forget, like, we have the expertise in how to put buildings together, but the people that are going to use them have the expertise in how they're going to live, work, and play there, right? And so a lot of it, so in my research and working with public libraries, public projects, we'd see a lot of architects, interior designers and such, they would come up with these great ideas and concepts why the library looks the way it does, but they forgot to bring the public of the public library with them. They had different processes of how much they involved them or not. But in the end, when they would build these beautiful buildings, they were seen as failures by the community because the community didn't get why they did what they did, right? Why did you make these decisions? It doesn't mean to me what you think it means to you as the designer. So there's that loss of value in translation, that, all of that put together. So you could have a great product, but the outcome is a failure.
Well, this is like is it Charles Eames that said, the extent to which a designer's stamp is on a project is the extent to which they didn't listen to the client.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It's
Yeah. When you-
impactful for designers to think about.
Right.
Yeah, and for all of us too. And the curse of knowledge that you talked about, we tend to assume or we forget
That we
what
don't
it was
know.
like to be in that,
Yeah. And
that vulnerable state of,
it's crazy because we get these kids out of their neighborhoods and where they live, and we bring them to design school, and we're like beat out of them everything they know about people and how they live. And then we send them out into practice and say, like, why don't you know how to work with people? Right? Like, they can't even go home and talk to their parents about the house they live in or the people that live in their community more, because we've stripped them of that understanding of people, that humanity, and it's all about design as product, right? Just that building, that site, whatever it is, as opposed to thinking about the transformative power that can come out of it when we work with the people that are actually the users of that space or place.
Well, and that design is an inherently, or should be an inherently humble discipline. I mean, that we have to approach challenges knowing that all of our knowledge, all of our education, all of our practice does give us something to bring to the table, but we still don't know the culture, the nuances of the people that we're designing for until we go find those things out.
It's the
And
context.
That's you have to take that humble
multifaceted,
approach.
yeah.
so it sounds like anthropology, ethnography, archaeology, that's part of the job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All of the above.
So I can talk to any group of people in the business and we all recognize client comes first, client-centric design, human-centric design. Why is it so hard for us to do that? Where are we stuck? Where's the industry stuck? How can we get unstuck? Especially now when there's a real challenge of understanding the current context we're in the future.
I would say it comes down to a fear of uncertainty. And so we want to fill in the blanks, right? And probably a little too quickly, and be the experts in the room, rather than learning with our clients and learning internally with our people. And again, I love the word humble. I call it humble curiosity is like my favorite word to describe what I think we really need. But uncertainty makes us feel a sense of threat, right? So we want to fill in the blanks, and I think it's getting more comfortable with the unknown, and actually letting our clients know or our people know, like, I don't know if this is going to really work out. Let's give this a try, and having more of the startup mentality of let's experiment with this. And I think foundational, going back to emotional intelligence, is this growth mindset. Learning to add to our vocabulary. I don't know this yet, right? I'm learning with you. And I think where we get stuck is, when I hear things like, but it's always been this way, right? Or I like the way it used to be. And that tells me like, well, this is a place where we have to push and increase our mindset to have this growth mindset. I don't know yet. Let's learn together.
It seems like an almost impossible thing to ask for courageous architects and people in an environment that's risk averse, right? You make a mistake in front of a client, the timelines you're given, all those things seem to work against being human. We can be efficient, even brilliant, and then the outcome is we don't like it's not us. I remember one person talking about a headquarters they had, and they were interviewing people, and she was almost in tears. And it sounded like a marriage counseling session instead of an interview for a project. And she said, we have a beautiful facility and it's got everything we might want. It's just not us. And it was a headquarters. So the point was they were doing a regional headquarters in another part of the country. Said, we don't want to go through that again. But now more than ever, all the exercises we're going through, optimizing space, trying to create more conference areas, soft seating, loose furniture. Is it the tail wagging the dog, or is there a chance we can get this right?
We can get it right.
Okay.
We can get it right. There are a couple of things that come to mind. The time pressure has never stopped. The frustrating thing about that in 25 years of doing this is that it's never going to go to zero. It's sort of like people saying, make it cost less, make it cost less. Well, it's never going to get free. So what does less mean? What does faster mean? And I think we need to take the license to say a visioning session will take 2 hours. Time pressure notwithstanding, we can find 2 hours with a cross section of folks with the client on the client side to do a visioning session where we walk people through exercises that get us an incredible depth of understanding. We don't always do that in projects.
Yeah.
But we should do it most of the time.
We short circuit that front end part,
Yes.
which is your least expensive part.
Right.
Is to talk, to think,
Right.
to do scenarios.
The other thing is our industry is not co-creating nearly enough. We use the firm that we use because they will co-create with us. Part of that is, as a design director, I'm probably never gonna totally take my hands out of the design piece because I love it, and I'm a strong creative director in that space. Part of it is if we don't co-create, we will end up with spaces. I mean, for too many years, design has been an industry full of people that wear a lot of black and we don't really know what they do, but when they come back, we hope it's great. That's not enough for a client. That's not enough for a C-suite to keep opening the purse strings. So there's not enough co-creation. And I see firms every day that talk about co-creation, but they actually don't know how to do it.
So, Justin, do your clients let you now? I know this is a little bit of setup because we've got the
One of them
architect
does.
client here. One of them does. One of them does, and we'll get
All
into a case study story when you and I talk, which is an incredible story. But your client, Fifth Third Bank, which is hard to say fast. They're unusual in terms of their willingness to co-create and to go down that road. But what are you finding in terms of acceptance levels? If you were going to take the pie that you have, what percent are willing to co-create? What percent want the status quo?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's still skewed towards they want, just the regular services, right? They know about we got to design something, we got to draw it up, we got to build it. And you're right, it's that upfront, and not only upfront, but really it should progress throughout the project so it's integrated into it. We've talked a lot with you about the integrated, delivery product system process. And a part of that really is, right, how are you taking what you're hearing at the front end, people's hopes and dreams, their desires for it, right? The vision, the culture. How are you making sure that gets put into all of the project through decision making, right? It's the touchstone that really should guide it. And it does. It comes down to that, well, we don't have enough time. That's too expensive, right? But then again, you get to the end of the project and it's not there. It doesn't have the soul, right? And so, we talk a lot about place. I come from a David Cantor forensic psychology place, so that social, cultural, and physical. How do you bring those three together? And so for designers, very much that social, what's the function, right? What are the activities? Easy, we got that. What's the physical? What's the attributes? What's it look like? Great. But it's that cultural piece, that values, that meaning, that gets skipped. So we don't teach that in school. I think that's the bigger problem, is we don't talk, even to students, about how do you draw that out of your clients? Why is it important? What should we be doing? So that's a big part of it too, is we're not educating our professionals, especially our emerging professionals, to do that.
So Karen, I'd like to shift this a little bit, because you're working with a very large architectural firm. So you're getting lots of exposure to emotional intelligence in an industry that's not known for emotional intelligence. They're known for brilliance and creativity and delivery. What are you finding in terms of how it's shifting for your firm? Where are the challenges you're running into? Because it really starts if the emotional intelligence isn't in the people, on the front end,
Right.
then it's not going to happen on the rest of it.
Yeah. I was definitely thinking about that as both of you were talking about what happens with the team that's actually creating, right? Because we're talking a lot about the relationship with the client, and I'm curious, but how are they being treated? What are they thinking about, right? And so I wouldn't say that is across the board, the design firm. We don't have people with high emotional intelligence. I just think it varies the degree at which it's prioritized, right? And so I think internally we have to shift from only prioritizing how much business you're bringing in and how many awards you're getting to, do people really want to work with you? Are you building the best teams around you?
What's the impact?
What is the impact you're making on
Long-term
your people,
relationships.
the relationships you're building?
So what you measure, in other words,
Exactly.
Right.
what
We have
you
to
get.
change that metric.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And to answer, have I seen a change? I think I've seen a dramatic change, actually. And it is one of the pluses of COVID, quite honestly, has been we were in people's homes, right? All of a sudden, right? On Zoom and, having to really take stock of people's personal lives at a completely different degree, and then really paying attention to diversity, making bold statements about where we want to take, the design industry to be more inclusive. And we've made that a top priority, internally. So when that begins to happen, you have to shift the conversations you're having internally, right? So I think what I have seen is a shift in vocabulary where, even just saying the word, vulnerability or, having candor and empathy isn't something that is awkward. In design firms, we don't talk about this. It becomes part of what we talk about every day. And, really not being okay with certain behaviors and having a system that it's okay to call it out. I actually like the word calling it forward, right? Because it's not about catching somebody and making somebody feel bad about a behavior that they
I like that.
applied for years in their lives and it was okay. And all of a sudden we're, saying, honestly, this is a moment where we call you forward so we can learn together. And again, that's the growth mindset again. It's going to be different. Right? We have to learn to speak differently to each other, to prioritize our people. And I think the metrics, that's where it's at for us. How can we measure the impact that a leader, is having on their team, not just the amount of work that they're bringing to the door, the awards that they're getting. So it's both.
So I'm hearing a few things. The metrics, what we measure, changing vocabulary, new taxonomies, new process. I haven't seen the process redesigned except for, integrated project delivery, and you do integrated project design.
Right.
And that restructures where the research is done and how the team is formed and who comes to the table. I want to shift a little bit on emotional intelligence and employee well-being. How does that play into it? We've just gone through a global mass disaster. And Dr. Jernigan, who's a colleague, described this as it's nothing short of wartime conditions. Trauma went from an average of 4%, PTSD, 4% in the general population, up to 30% during the pandemic. And if you think about, I'm sure if I went, the losses you all experience, family members, pets, friends, things like that, and my family's no exception. Are we even ready to come back and flip the switch on? And then how do we handle that? Because, the research is pretty clear that trauma is this thing that stays until a trigger hits. or burnout, it looks fine for a long time, and then boom, it just hits you.
I just want to add, yes, I didn't know the stats. That's terrifying. But the interesting thing is trauma impacts emotional intelligence. So if you have more trauma, then you are generally going to score lower in emotional intelligence. But the flip side of that is that if you work on your emotional intelligence, all the strategies for improving your emotional intelligence, which, by the way, you can. So unlike personality traits, where you're pretty much fixed, if you're an introvert, you're going to be an introvert. Emotional intelligence, you can actually work on it, right? You can actually, there's ways in which you can become more empathetic and be more assertive, those kinds of things. So when you work on emotional intelligence, you're actually also working on your trauma.
Interesting.
So a lot of the same skills and strategies apply. So I would say double down on it right now. Make that a top priority in your organizations if that is the stats, because you're actually helping people work through those traumas without getting into, the mental health side of things that may not be pertinent within the organization, right? You want to provide the benefits for people to get that resource outside, but there are things that internally we can absolutely do. And I'll just add one more thing too, is that emotional intelligence, just like trauma, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Your emotional intelligence isn't something that you measure in isolation from the context. So, if let's say you're generally a really optimistic person, but you're going through something pretty traumatic in your personal life or professional life, it is going to impact how you score, let's say on optimism in your assessment, right? So, that is where organizations have a really great opportunity to think about how is the context creating that psychological safety, a sense of belonging, increasing transparency, because all of those things will indirectly impact how somebody scores on an emotional intelligence and grow in their emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Karen, you phrased something in a way that just, there's something that I've been thinking about around what you asked, Rex, which is not just leadership, but the other side of that coin, which is agency. And what you said is, if you are working on emotional intelligence, you are working on trauma. And that's an individual thing. So we have to encourage people to take agency over their individual careers, lives, destinies, calendars, so that they as an individual are able to process what they need, articulate what they need. And as leaders, the flip side of that is, as a leader, you are the thermostat, not the thermometer. It means you set the temperature, you set the culture. And you can't do everything as an individual leader, but you sure can do a lot. You can have an incredible impact. If I'm not willing to take agency over my destiny, so to speak, let's say in COVID, something happened and we didn't weather it well. As an individual, I need to realize that I'm not doing well here and seek out what I need to do well again. Nobody can do that for me. And I think as leaders and organizationally even, we can encourage people to do that. We can share resources. We can set a culture where it's okay to raise your hand and say, I need to take a time out for a minute because I'm not okay right now. And the power of that, of really encouraging people to take agency, means now they have an entire new trajectory potentially. I can tell you on a personal level, our family weathered COVID fairly well. Within the last 6 months, I have been on one of the most difficult personal journeys I've ever had in my entire life. Didn't expect it, didn't want it. It's happening. And the leader I have is the leader that I need right now. Because I was able to go to him and say, I need you to know I'm not okay. I'm going to be fine at work. I will succeed. I'm determined to do it. I'm dedicated. I've got some things going on that I need to pay attention to.
Wow.
And I need you to be aware of it. And the incredible compassion, empathy, support. I have been so covered in the best possible way because I'm under the right leadership.
Some of that speaks to the culture that you guys have as well.
Yes. And microculture. I mean, he's created a microculture within our organization.
microculture.
He's a talent attractor, and he's outstanding at retaining. There are a lot of people that are there because they work for him, and I'm one of them.
Wow, that's good. Justin?
Yeah, I think that's really going to be the differentiator post pandemic, is that how critical those relationships are between leadership, managers, employees, and really thinking through seeing people as people, right? Realizing that, hey, as a leader, I have these issues I have to run through. They may be different. I may have different privilege, right, and abilities versus them. But it's funny to see how we talk about leadership in one way and employees in the other way, because typically as designers, we work with clients, right? And a lot of that doesn't trickle down to working with management. That doesn't trickle down at all working with employees, hell, even end users, right, of our spaces. And so that process really needs to get through all of that if you really want to look at the entire culture, right? That full community of work versus those the micro, the communities, sub-communities of work. But then again, the other way, then we talk about resilience and emotional intelligence. All of a sudden we start talking about employees then, right? And we forget about the leadership part. Managers need more training than anybody these days because they're stuck in the middle. They're the ones that have to they're in the trenches with employees. But leadership also needs that training and how they think about people, what they're going through, why they might not want to come to work, what those hurdles are for them, or they're so out of touch, right, with the way they live, that kind of thinking has to go back. So I think it really comes down to readjusting our focus on who we're including in those conversations, who we're focused on, and how we bring them together.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge because you're absolutely right. We don't have direct influence on management, but that's the linchpin. It either works
Right.
there or it doesn't. The statistics are not good.
Right.
Only 18% of managers are like your boss. Only 18%. And so that's categorized as developmental. Most managers, 82%, are effective as what we call task-oriented. They're good at directing work, troubleshooting, holding accountability, and it worked well when people were present, when everybody was together. One of the things I saw during the pandemic is it really exploded the division between good managers and the ones that were okay became poor managers because their people suffered.
Yep.
Now, here's the challenge, and I think this is possible, but this is why we've got you guys together to solve this problem here. I think there's a process way of helping managers. One of the things I saw for a project, they lost 90% of their stock value during the real estate crash. They totally changed the structure of the organization from different specialties like institutional, retail, commercial, and industrial. Made it team basis. So they changed structure. They totally changed the environment, right? They had 70% private offices, and then they ended up with one. There was almost a mutiny through the process, all of that stuff going on. The person in charge would not be considered to be the most emotionally intelligent person on the planet. He's a deal maker. But he was smart enough to know that what got us here isn't going to get us forward. And what he did is he created stakeholders, 8 different groups of people inside. So I think there's a process opportunity, but I'd like to hear your thoughts because we can't directly get to the managers. And yet that's the Achilles heel, 82%. But the process that they created allowed a new community or a stakeholder engagement process. So I'm interested to hearing what you're seeing in that. Is that a viable, restructuring of how we go about doing things?
Well, I can talk about, I think, the shift, right? I think leadership used to be sort of command, right? You kind of have the answer, and people are looking up to you, and you're supposed to be inspiring and charismatic. And I think the shift is it's about guidance and coaching. So I think that everyone who's in a management role and going up, that ladder, the focus needs to be, how are you coaching? And by coaching, I mean, you're not supposed to have and give all the answers. You're not supposed to manage every task. You're supposed to guide. You're supposed to ask the questions and teach, really. Let people actually find the answers on their own. Because that will free up the individual who's caught in the middle, right? Because managers have a really tough job in that, they have to deliver, right? They are oftentimes client facing and dealing with the people in the background. Staffing, it's a challenge as we know in design. And if they move from this mindset of I have to have all the answers and I have to, manage every task, to how am I going to coach my team? I think that that's a place where every organization can start. How are we training people to be coaches? So this is not the job of one person in the organization.
Sure, right.
And so that's the first thing. I think, the second part of it is managers are caught in a I would say, like, I can see this, where we don't have a model of leadership template right now. We're having to create as we go. And listening to the younger generation coming into the workforce is our greatest opportunities. So I don't know if you've heard of this concept of a reverse mentoring, right? Where you spend time not to coach and teach the junior team member, but actually to learn from them. And so are there opportunities for us to invite younger generation into meetings where it used to be closed doors? And I think we do two things. We are teaching the managers to learn quicker how to manage their teams, but also, we are increasing the level of transparency, which the younger generation and everybody actually enjoys that. And so that creates trust. And then there's more of an open dialogue. So those are not dramatic ways that you can change the entire, organizational chart of your organization, but you can start thinking about individually the skills that you want to build.
I think one of the things you called out is exactly right in this particular area, Rex, which is the things that made us successful are not the things that will keep us successful or catapult us further.
Right.
That's a major learning for leaders when you get to a certain level to realize, like, oh, I got here because I'm a producer. Now I need to become a delegator. It's a completely different skill set. Mm-hmm. So to learn that, not only as an individual, but organizationally is really critical. From a process perspective, as an owner, we do a couple of things. One is when we do a visioning session, it includes not only a cross-section of people from various departments, but a cross-section of people from various levels in the hierarchy. Has to include mid-level leaders, largely because mid-level leaders historically are the ones that struggle the most with what I will crassly call meat-in-the-seat leadership. They just... that's the hardest, that group, it's the hardest for them. Sometimes we do not include the top level leaders on purpose. It depends on...
Yeah, they change the atmosphere.
It
just
depends
walking
on
in.
the shadow culture that they have created.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
You can have some of those folks that can sit in the room quietly and everybody's very open and you'll get really good data. Some of those folks walk in the room and you will get nothing because of their presence.
Right.
It's that disconnect that you talked about, Justin, where it's like they just don't know what the team is thinking because the team is too scared to say. So those visioning sessions not only are important in and of themselves, but what the invite list looks like is really critical.
It's good.
And when we mine those sessions for all that we can get from them, we're much more successful. We also call out explicitly to leaders that we need them. So if I think about our next gen branch design and walking people through why we're creating branches the way we are, we talk about owner adoption versus verbal adoption versus resistors. And we say to financial center managers, if you will embrace this as an owner adopter, lean into it and treat the space like it belongs to you, because it does, the entire experience changes for your customers. We can give you the most beautiful building in the world, and you have the power to make it go flat or make it sing. And we do the same thing in corporate spaces where we say to leaders, like, we need you to model the way for the things that we've heard you and your teams tell us that you need. And so if we can get their engagement, if we can get them to sit in the open like everybody else to do certain tasks during the day, they become more approachable. People learn how to use the space because they're watching leaders use the space. We call it out explicitly that if you don't lean into this like you own it, it's not going to go as well.
It's good.
Yeah, and I think that disconnect, what's funny is we talk about empathy, right? And for leadership, and for some reason, they tend to forget what it was to not be a leader many times, right? And the trouble is now our world has changed so much that they can't even empathize because whatever they went through is not the same as it is now. But then the third hard part is that, hey, I did it, they should too, right? Which, I mean, hell, that's rife in the design disciplines, let alone, the all-nighters. Well, that's what I did, so that's what I'm going to expect of my people. So just breaking through those barriers.
The thing I want to look at too, and this is again part of my concern, is watching the numbers on empathy drop so dramatically. The college class of 1979 is when they began measuring empathy in college students. It's dropped 40% since that time. During the pandemic, it dropped about 18%. And a lot of that can be attributed to compassion fatigue, things like that. However, when I think about, I like Gallup's definition. It's the ability to instinctively put myself in someone else's shoes and see the world through their lens. That's how they define it. We've lost that capacity because if you think about empathy as the gateway emotional skill of being able to listen to somebody, kind of see the world through their lens, experience what they're experiencing. And that happens with people. It doesn't happen virtually. It just can't happen virtually. Now you can sustain a relationship that you already have virtually,
Right.
but you can't build it. My son, who's a gamer, is debating me on the issue. And, there may be some opportunities there, but there's certain ways we gain it. Dr. Heckman, who is an economist at University of Chicago, talked about that the ages of 3 to 5 is where we develop most of those social and emotional skills, and they stay with us. However, we either build them, let them atrophy, or we shut them down. And trauma is one way that it gets shut down. Bad experience with something, I'm not going to go down that road again. So we have certain institutions that have been traditionally the places where we have to learn how to play well together. Schools, work, faith-based institutions, to some degree the marketplace. And now we've radically changed the structure. Right now, Nick Bloom, the economist, says that about 2 to 3 days a week is what people will give you that they're willing to come in. So we've reached this equilibrium by default, not by design, but by default. So I have all kinds of questions because there's a camp that says this is the best thing that's ever happened. Remote work, hybrid, it's the new liberation. The fact that I'm older and I understand systems, I'm wondering, and I'm seeing the unintended negative consequences that could be far greater than the little bit of liberty that we're experiencing or the freedom we're experiencing. So what the question I have, if we need to be together, I'm not saying we need to go to work. If we need to be together, if that's what we're designed, we're social animals. We see depression going up. We see narcissism going up. Am I seeing this right? And or am I just kind of old school? We could go to work. Not that I go to work. I have my own little cottage in the woods. But am I seeing this right? Is there something here that's not romance? Is there something beyond the romance of the freedom that maybe we need to start thinking more seriously about long-term systemic issues, democracy maybe?
Yeah, I would like to speak to that. I don't think you can build social emotional intelligence via Zoom, period.
Okay.
You have to be together.
Great.
So the way you measure, right, your emotional intelligence is relational, right? And so there are a couple of things that I've observed with the, sort of the younger generation, especially those coming into the workforce right now and having had to finish school or have the first 2 years of their work experience remote, is the discomfort with, conflict and not understanding how to be in a space and, manage, right? Because so much of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, like
Right.
what's going on with me. And it's different than being on Zoom where you can shut off the camera, send somebody a message with a smart, remark because, you're not in a room. You can do that. So I think, absolutely, I think that if empathy is that low, we need to be together. Now, of course, understanding the level of flexibility and the needs that
Right.
individuals have and how that will look like, that's where great leadership will come in, right? It's not going to be the same for everybody, but fostering opportunities for people to manage their emotions, right? I think that social media also created another layer of, I can choose who's in my group. I can, I don't know,
Create the echo chamber.
yeah, I can, I can curate my social network. And in a work environment, even if it's the most wonderful work environment, which, I think we're all trying to create, you're going to have some people you don't like, and you're going to have to work with them and you're going to have to create something amazing, a product you're going to have to deliver. So how do you do that? It's by the building of those emotional, social emotional skills, like understanding what am I feeling? How am I going to react to this? How do I express my emotions? How do I actually ask for what I need instead of resenting, having the meeting after the meeting, right? I think
Sidebar,
that
passive aggressive.
exactly. So I think accountability really comes from people feeling a sense of trust, vulnerability, that things have been discussed, they've been a part of the solution, then they are committed to the solution and they will hold themselves accountable. It's really hard to do this if you have no social emotional skills. You don't have to work on that. You turn off your camera anytime you're uncomfortable. It's just not how we work on empathy and those kinds of things. So I am 100% proponent of coming
I got
back.
One person on my side.
Yeah.
Justin, how about you?
Sure. I mean, and we see that, again, it's also what supports the emotional intelligence. It's like that broad category of soft skills, right? We talked about productivity and such, and it was all about, you hit these metrics, do this stuff because you were trained to do it. But there's so much that's been left behind. We're seeing younger generations come up, they don't want to make a phone call, right? And it's when you're building relationships, you got to come and use all the means necessary to do that, to stay connected. And I think the flexibility is the pro of it, but really that's just leadership, understanding that people are people and have things they need to do, right? And so that's where I push against the whole, like, you have to be in on Tuesday through Thursday and you could stay home Friday. Well, my life doesn't work that way.
That's not flexibility.
Right? Work doesn't, that's not true flexibility. And so when it comes down to, I think the big word is really intentionality, right? Is your manager intentionally reaching out to build those relationships? Is the team intentionally making sure that who's going to be in the office at the same time, as opposed to, well, it's based on my schedule, the individual. So it's building up those, we talked about individual behaviors, team norms, shared expectations. We got to get up to that level of thinking about the team, how they come together, and what's the intentionality behind what you're trying to do and why. Because those are the conversations that have been missing so far, is the well, why do you need to do this? Why is the employer making this choice? Why is the employee? If we could cross those boundaries and have those conversations, I think, there'd be
Yeah.
further understanding, deeper understanding, and more empathy for each other.
We're still in this awkward stage at an impasse where we know what we don't want about work,
Right.
right? And that's why people resist coming in, whatever it is, the commute, distraction, brain dead meetings, bad bosses. That's the number one reason people quit.
Sure.
And stress. I don't think we've gotten to the point where we really know what it is to live and work better together in this new environment. I keep hearing that, the advocacy for the hybrid, I get the flexibility and all of that. But what I don't see happening is creating, I keep hearing that the reason why it isn't working yet is that, or that companies haven't adopted it, is they don't know how to adopt this. But I think there's a bigger issue. The structure of what we used to do, command and control, all that, doesn't fit the structure of what we do now. And it just reminds me of the debate on construction projects. If it's a design bid build project, the structure is distrust and adversarial relationships. Now, if you get lucky, you might deliver it on time, but that is 90% don't. But if you restructure integrated project delivery where the key stakeholders are on the front end, there's a restructuring that's taken place. I think that's a design issue, isn't it?
I think sometimes you have to break something to rebuild it.
I like that.
And that's really, really scary. So with everything you just said, Rex, the thing that kept coming to my head is fear. It's fear. It's fear. And I have a lot of compassion because fear is visceral for human beings. Super, super visceral. It is the emotion that just rips through your physiology and does things in your body that can be hard to control. For business leaders, you're affecting people's jobs, their livelihoods, their families. That's pretty scary. But I think there are some things we know need to be broken. I also think one of the things that COVID did was reveal to us, hopefully, some illusions that we had about what was.
Right.
The idea that people were in the office all the time before is absolute fallacy in almost all places.
Office utilization, when we wrote the book, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, was 50% in 2014.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's part of the myth.
Right. So any executive who thinks we need to go back to that, well, you might already be there, actually. So when we talk about breaking things to build it, it's trying things like we're having no meeting Mondays. Try it for a month. See what happens. You don't have to keep doing it if it's not working.
Yeah.
So I think there are things like that if to get to the future that we want, we might have to break some things. We're probably going to have to break some perceptions. And to be transparent with people that we're going to try some things and we don't know if they're going to work, and we need you to tell us, is it working for you? Is it making it worse? Is it making it better? Are you taking no meeting Mondays and just filling it with meetings anyway because now you know that everybody's available? How are these things working? So I think there's any number of things we could try to get there.
Justin, how about for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what I've seen is it's leadership, that paralysis of making decisions, and a lot of it just not having those conversations, right? And so a lot of the facilitation, the visioning that we do is really trying to create that space for them to have those conversations that we know that they're not having. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, we go to design a project, a workplace, right? And like the first question is like, how and when do you want your people are going to be here, right? What's the utilization rate? Why do you want them to come in? Why, and they look at you with this blank stare and you're like, I can't answer that for you. You need to answer that for you and your people. And so it's so difficult to pull that teeth, and why don't you just try piloting, right? Take a floor, take a department, take a team, whatever it is, and just try it out. And I get it, because there is that fear of, oh my gosh, these people's livelihoods, their families, but in the end, the value that could be created from it is so much better than what's there now. It's that we've had this saying, right? Doing the same thing and expecting different results, is madness, is insanity. It's no different here.
Yeah.
And so as we're faced with this post-pandemic new way of working, it's all out the window, and so leadership, for me, the biggest takeaway is like, stop being afraid. We talk about these visionary leaders who are unwilling to think about, what does this need to be now? What do we need to be, and how do we get there?
Or we design practice zones, places where people can try things with low risk.
A little innovation lab.
Prototyping
Yeah.
space.
Exactly.
Karen, you're going
Yeah.
to wrap this up.
Yeah, no, I think all of the points were great. A couple of things that I would reiterate is it is the importance of, and I think I mentioned this in the beginning, of failing and trying it again, right? So that developing that mindset of, especially with systems and cultural things that we're going to have to shift. Be explicit, right? This is where leadership can do better to say, I don't know if this is going to work. Let's work together. And in order
Setting expectations.
Yeah, setting expectations. And I think during COVID, many organizations were much more willing to do pulse checks more frequently. And I think we should continue to do that, because the change that we experienced, although it was dramatic, I don't think it was the end of it. I think we're going to continue to experience very dramatic changes at a much faster pace. And so, get in the habit of checking in, right? Having systems that you can do those pulse checks, check the pulse of your people. And I would add, I think this is more like a systems issue, that I think a lot of organizations, and I can say, where I work, we approached COVID as a temporary situation, right? So we're going to make do with onboarding online. We're going to make do, right? Because eventually we're going to come back. And I think there is a whole slew of opportunities around creating, whether it's onboarding or performance reviews or whatever it is, even trainings, really truly hybrid, right? And to really think about it as hybrid, because I think we're trying to use the systems we had before and trying to patch it on top of what is right now. And again, that's where they're blowing up and starting again. I think there's a great opportunity there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the time. I'm going to get a chance to talk to each of you, take a deeper dive, and I appreciate that you came out here, shared very direct kinds of feedback. And I know that I'm going to go back and think about this whole field of emotional intelligence. Seems like it's got to be baked into our conversations, to our processes, to our design. We've got to help leaders feel the permission to try, because we've never been down this road. There's no map. So thank you for your time.